Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The Forgotten Fleet awakens, and it unleashed a tempest of eternal flames. The message came at 3:00 hours, crackling through the communications array of Outpost 7 like a ghost from the past. Lieutenant James Reed bolted upright in his bunk, heart pounding. The emergency alert on his comm unit flashed red in the darkness of his quarters. As the military historian assigned to this remote listening post, Reed was rarely included in emergency communications. Something big was happening. "Lieutenant Reed to command center immediately," the mechanical voice announced. Reed dressed quickly, his mind racing. The outpost, positioned at the edge of human-controlled space, mostly monitored background radiation and the occasional merchant vessel. In the 3 months since his assignment here, a punishment posting for his obsessive theories about lost military vessels, nothing exciting had happened. Until now. The command center hummed with unusual activity when Reed arrived. Technicians huddled around the main console, faces illuminated by the blue glow of screens. Commander Ellis looked up as Reed entered, his weathered face tight with tension. "Reed, good, you're the expert on the storm, correct?" Reed nodded, suddenly alert. The UEF Storm was the most famous lost warship in human history, vanishing 80 years ago during a classified mission. Reed had built his career studying the incident, eventually earning himself this remote assignment when his theories became too uncomfortable for military leadership. "We picked up a signal," Ellis said, gesturing to the main screen. "Automated distress beacon, old pattern, but the ship ID." He paused, studying Reed's face. "It's the Storm." The room seemed to tilt beneath Reed's feet. "That's impossible. The Storm disappeared 8 decades ago." "See for yourself." Reed approached the console where a technician named Mira worked. She nodded at him and stepped aside. There on the screen, unmistakable despite the signal degradation, was the unique identifier code of the UEF Storm, along with coordinates. "This could be a hoax," Reed said, but his voice lacked conviction. The code sequences contained authentication markers that would be nearly impossible to fake. "Where's the signal coming from?" Ellis pointed to the star chart. "The Dorn sector, unexplored territory just beyond the Keller Rift." Reed's mind raced through possibilities. The Storm was last seen near the garrison system, nowhere near the Dorn sector. "That's why you're here, Lieutenant," Ellis said. "Is this real? And if it is, how did a ship missing for 80 years suddenly reappear halfway across the galaxy?" Before Reed could answer, the communications officer called out, "Incoming transmission from Fleet Command." The main screen flickered, revealing the stern face of Admiral Wilson. His gray eyes swept across the command center before settling on Ellis. "Commander, I understand you've received a signal from the Storm." Ellis straightened. "Yes, Admiral, we verified the authentication codes. They appear genuine." Wilson's expression remained unchanged. "This information is now classified. A recovery mission is being assembled. A scout vessel, Horizon, under Captain Moore, will investigate. They'll arrive at your outpost within 12 hours. Reed stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Admiral, request permission to join the recovery mission. I've studied the Storm incident for years. My expertise could be valuable." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Ah, Lieutenant Reed, your reputation precedes you." He paused. "Considering your obsession with the Storm is well documented, perhaps it's time to put your theories to the test." "Thank you, sir," Reed said, relief flooding through him. "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant," Wilson replied coldly. "This is not an academic exercise. If the Storm has indeed returned, we need to know why and how, and if there's any threat to Earth Alliance security. I expect clear assessment, not historical speculation." After the transmission ended, Ellis turned to Reed. "You have 8 hours to prepare, Lieutenant. I suggest you gather your research and get ready. Captain Moore has a reputation for running a tight ship. She won't appreciate your enthusiasm if it interferes with her mission." Reed nodded, his mind already sorting through the essential data he would need. After years of ridicule for his theories about the Storm, vindication was finally within reach. The Horizon arrived exactly on schedule, a sleek vessel designed for deep space reconnaissance. Reed watched from the outpost's observation deck as it docked, its hull gleaming under the bright lights. When Captain Lisa Moore stepped through the airlock, Reed understood immediately why she had risen quickly through the ranks despite being only 35. Her posture radiated authority, and her sharp eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the outpost crew assembled to greet her. "Commander Ellis," she said, nodding curtly. "My crew is ready to depart immediately. I understand Lieutenant Reed will be joining us." Her gaze found Reed, assessing him with obvious skepticism. "Captain Moore," Reed said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "It's an honor to meet you. I've brought all my research on the storm. I believe I can help make sense of whatever we find." Moore shook his hand briefly. "Let me be clear, Lieutenant. This mission has one objective: assess the situation and secure the vessel if possible. I'm not interested in historical mysteries or academic glory. Is that understood?" "Yes, Captain," Reed replied, feeling his face flush. "My only goal is to help recover the storm." Moore studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Get your gear on board. We depart in 30 minutes. As Reed hurried to collect his things, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Finding the storm after all these years should have been impossible. Ships didn't simply disappear for 8 decades and then reappear sending distress signals. Something was very wrong. 6 hours into their journey toward the coordinates, Reed sat in his small cabin aboard the Horizon, reviewing his files on the storm. The warship had been the pride of the Earth fleet, equipped with experimental weapons systems and engines that were decades ahead of their time. Its disappearance had sparked countless theories, from enemy action to mutiny. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Engineer Tom Garcia stood there, looking concerned. "Lieutenant, you might want to come to the bridge. We're experiencing some strange readings." Reed followed Garcia through the corridors of the Horizon. Captain Moore stood at the command console with her first officer, Jack Hale, both staring intently at the displays. "What's happening?" Reed asked. Moore glanced at him. "Our systems are detecting unusual energy patterns ahead, and our long-range scanners are experiencing interference." Reed moved closer to look at the screens. The data showed bizarre fluctuations in the surrounding space. "This matches some of the reported anomalies in the last transmissions from the storm before it disappeared," he said quietly. Moore's head snapped toward him. "Explain." "Before contact was lost, the storm reported instrument malfunctions and energy readings that didn't make sense. The science officer described it as space folding in on itself." A sudden alarm blared through the bridge. "Captain," called out the navigation officer, "all systems are experiencing failures. Guidance is offline." "Switch to manual control," Moore ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The lights flickered, and for a moment the bridge was plunged into darkness before emergency systems activated. In that brief moment of darkness, Reed thought he heard something, a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Words he couldn't quite understand, but that left a chill running down his spine. When the lights came back on, the main view screen showed something that made everyone on the bridge fall silent. There, drifting against the backdrop of distant stars, was the massive silhouette of a warship. Despite 8 decades in the void, its outline was unmistakable. The UEF storm had returned. But as the horizon drew closer, Reed could see that something was terribly wrong. The once proud vessel was scarred with strange patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner light, and around the ship, space itself seemed to bend and distort, as if reality there had become thin and fragile. "My God," Moore whispered, "what happened to it?" Reed had no answer. After years of searching for the truth about the storm, he was suddenly afraid of what they might find aboard the legendary lost warship. Captain Moore organized the boarding party with military precision. "Reed, you're with me. Garcia, bring your engineering kit. Dr. Patel and Security Officer Brooks will complete our team." Reed checked his environment suit one final time. The Horizon had managed to establish a stable position 500 meters from the storm. Close-range scans showed that life support systems on the ancient warship were non-functional, and radiation levels were fluctuating wildly. "Remember," Moore said as they gathered in the airlock, "we go in, we assess, we document, and we leave. No heroics, no souvenirs." Her eyes lingered on Reed when she said the last part. He nodded, understanding her concern. His lifelong obsession with the storm might cloud his judgment. "The ship has been adrift for 80 years, Captain," he replied. "I just want answers." The journey between the two ships was tense and silent. Their small shuttle crossed the void, approaching the massive hull of the storm. Up close, the damage was even more disturbing. What had appeared as scarring from a distance now revealed itself as intricate patterns etched into the metal, swirling organic designs that seemed to pulse faintly in the darkness. "Those aren't weapon impacts," Garcia observed. "They look grown." Reed nodded, "Almost like circuit patterns, but not like any technology I've ever seen." They docked at an emergency airlock near the command deck. Garcia overrode the ancient security protocols, and the outer door slowly ground open, revealing a dark chamber beyond. "Lights on," Moore ordered as they entered the ship. 5 beams cut through the darkness, revealing a corridor that stretched ahead. Emergency lighting flickered weakly, casting strange shadows. The artificial gravity was still functioning at minimal levels, creating a disorienting sensation as they moved forward. "Air's thin but present," Patel reported, checking her instruments. "Temperature minus 15 degrees C, something still powering basic systems." Reed struggled to contain his emotions. He was walking the decks of the Storm, the ship that had consumed his career and imagination for years. But instead of excitement, he felt a growing sense of dread. "Where are the bodies?" Brooks asked, giving voice to what they all were thinking. A ship this size would have had a crew of at least 300, yet the corridors were empty, no remains, no signs of evacuation. They reached the main command center. The massive doors were sealed shut, but Garcia made quick work of the controls. "Ready?" Moore asked, weapon drawn. They nodded, and the doors slid open with a groan of protesting metal. The bridge of the Storm lay before them, a cavernous space filled with workstations, most dark and lifeless. The main view screen was cracked, and several control panels had been torn open, their components scattered. "Looks like a fight," Brooks said, kneeling to examine marks on the floor. Reed moved to the captain's station, heart pounding. This was where Captain Mark Taylor had stood, commanding the most advanced ship of his time. The console was covered in dust, but as Reed brushed it away, he noticed something strange. Thin filaments like metallic roots had grown through the controls. "Captain, you need to see this," he called. Moore joined him, shining her light on the bizarre growth. "What the hell is that?" "It's all over the ship," Garcia said from across the bridge. "These filaments, they're connecting to the ship's systems." He pointed to where the strange material had woven itself into a computer terminal. "It's like it's rewiring the ship." Dr. Patel scanned the material. "It's not reading as fully organic or fully mechanical. It's some kind of hybrid." Reed accessed the captain's terminal. To his surprise, it powered up, displaying corrupted log entries. "Look at this," he said as the others gathered around, the last entries before communication was lost. The screen flickered, showing fragmented video. Captain Taylor's face appeared haggard and strained. "Day 47 of the experiment. Drive functioning beyond expectations, tearing holes in spacetime." Static interrupted before continuing. "Made contact with something, not empty out there. They're coming through." The recording cut off. "What experiment?" Moore asked, turning to Reed. "What was this ship's real mission?" Reed shook his head. "All I know is they were testing a new FTL drive. Everything else was classified beyond my clearance." Garcia had moved to a science station and was examining another growth of the strange material. "This is incredible. It seems to be adapting the ship's technology to something else." He reached out, touching one of the filaments. "Garcia, don't," Brooks started to say, but it was too late. The engineer jerked back as if shocked. For a moment his eyes seemed to roll back and he swayed on his feet. "Are you all right?" Patel moved quickly to his side, scanning him. "I'm fine," Garcia said, blinking rapidly. "Just felt strange for a second." He shook his head. "Like voices." Patel frowned at her readings. "Your neural activity just spiked. We should get you back to the horizon." "No," Garcia protested. "I'm fine now, really." Moore looked unconvinced but nodded. "We'll continue, but no one touches anything else without proper precautions." They split into pairs to explore more of the ship. Reed and Moore headed toward the captain's quarters, while the others investigated the engine room. "What do you think happened here?" Moore asked as they moved through the silent corridors. "I'm not sure," Reed admitted, "but that log entry mentioned making contact with something. If they were experimenting with spacetime, you think they let something on board, or they brought the ship somewhere it wasn't supposed to go." The captain's quarters were locked by a high-security system that even Garcia's override couldn't crack remotely. Moore used a small cutting tool to force the door. Inside, they found chaos, furniture overturned, personal items scattered, signs of a desperate struggle. But it was the walls that drew their attention. Every surface was covered with strange symbols and equations, drawn in what appeared to be blood. "My God," Reed whispered, moving closer to examine the markings. "I recognize some of these symbols from ancient warning texts. This one represents the void between stars, and this one means evolution or transformation." At the center of the main wall was a detailed drawing of what appeared to be the storm itself, but transformed. Parts of it merged with organic-looking structures. "Read," Moore said quietly, pointing to the floor behind the desk. There lay a uniform jacket, captain's insignia still attached. Beside it was a small recording device. Moore picked it up carefully and activated it. Captain Taylor's voice filled the room, strained and hoarse. "This will be my final entry. The entity we contacted has infected the ship. It's changing us, using us to understand human technology. Most of the crew has already transformed. Those of us still fighting have sealed ourselves in separate sections, but it's only a matter of time. We can't let this ship return to Earth. Whatever happens, the storm must be destroyed." The recording ended. Reed and Moore exchanged grim looks. "We need to get back to the others," Moore said. As they turned to leave, their comms crackled to life with Dr. Patel's panicked voice. "Captain, Garcia's collapsed. He's having some kind of seizure and wait, he's getting up now, but something's wrong with his eyes. There, Garcia, what are you doing? Garcia, stop." The transmission cut off abruptly. "Patel, Brooks, report," Moore shouted into her comm, but only static answered. A shipwide alarm suddenly blared to life, red emergency lights flashing in the corridors around them. Dormant systems began powering up, displays flickering on with strange symbols. "The ship is waking up," Reed said, feeling a chill run down his spine. From somewhere deep in the vessel came a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the metal and into their bones. It didn't sound like machinery. It sounded like breathing. "We need to find the others," Moore said, drawing her weapon. The corridors of the storm had transformed from dead metal to a pulsing, living space. More of the strange filaments had emerged from the walls, growing visibly now, spreading like vines across the surfaces. Reed checked his handheld scanner. Life signs detected in the engine room, but they're strange, not reading as normal human patterns. They moved quickly through the ship, the emergency lights casting everything in a blood-red glow. The humming sound grew louder, developing a rhythm that almost resembled words just beyond understanding. "Do you hear that?" Reed asked. "It's like it's trying to speak." Moore didn't answer, her focus entirely on the path ahead. They reached a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, throwing them against the wall. "What was that?" Reed gasped. "The engines," Moore replied, eyes wide. "They're powering up." Reed activated his comm unit. "Horizon, this is Reed. The storm's engines are activating. You need to back off to a safe distance." Only static answered him. "Comms are being blocked," Moore said. "We're on our own." They continued toward the engine room, the ship's vibrations growing stronger. As they approached, they heard voices. One was Dr. Patel pleading. "Garcia, please, this isn't you, fight it." Moore signaled Reed to stop, then peered carefully around the corner into the massive engine chamber. The sight froze her blood. Garcia stood at the main control panel, his hands buried in a mass of the strange filaments. The material had crawled up his arms to his neck, pulsing with blue light. His eyes were the same glowing blue, vacant of humanity. Brooks lay unconscious, or worse, on the floor nearby, while Patel stood backed against a wall. "Let me explain what's happening," Garcia said, but his voice had changed, layered with other tones as if multiple voices spoke through him. "We are not here to harm, we are here to evolve." "Who's we?" Patel demanded, her medical scanner held out like a shield. "We have no name you would understand. We exist in the spaces between realities. Your ship, the Storm, tore a hole into our domain with its experiments. We were curious." Moore stepped into the room, weapon raised. "Step away from the controls, Garcia." The engineer turned, smiling strangely. "Captain Moore and Lieutenant Reed, good, all of you should hear this." The blue glow in his eyes pulsed. 80 years ago, this ship breached the barrier between dimensions. We had never encountered your kind before. We were fascinated. What did you do to the crew? Reed asked. We joined with them, enhanced them. Those who resisted did not survive the process, but those who accepted us became something greater. Reed remembered Captain Taylor's final recording. You infected them. Garcia, or whatever was controlling him, tilted his head. Your language lacks the proper concepts. We shared ourselves with them, and now, after 80 years of adaptation, we are ready to share with all of humanity. Moore kept her weapon steady. Where are the transformed crew members now? They are here, they are the ship. As if on cue, sections of the wall nearest to them shifted, bulging outward. Reed stared in horror as human faces, partially merged with the ship's structure, pushed through the metal. Eyes opened. Mouths moved silently. My God, Patel whispered. Reed fought against his rising panic. What do you want? To evolve, to expand. Your species has such potential, but you are limited by your physical forms. We can help you transcend. Moore had heard enough. She fired her weapon at the control panel beside Garcia. Sparks flew as the console exploded, but Garcia didn't flinch. The filaments around his hand simply redirected the energy, absorbing it. Violence is unnecessary, the entity said through Garcia. You cannot stop what has already begun. The ship lurched again, more violently this time. The engine's hum changed pitch, rising to a shriek. What's happening? Moore demanded. The final sequence has initiated, Garcia replied calmly. The storm is returning home. Reed checked his scanner again. Captain, the ship's FTL drive is activating, but the energy signature is like nothing I've ever seen. It's not jumping through space, it's trying to tear a hole in it. A gateway, Garcia corrected. Back to our realm where the transformation can be completed. With startling speed, Garcia suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Patel's arm. The filaments immediately flowed from his skin to hers. She screamed, trying to pull away, but it was too late. Blue light raced up her veins toward her face. Moore fired again, this time hitting Garcia directly. He staggered back, releasing Patel, who collapsed to the floor. Run, Moore shouted, grabbing Reed's arm. They fled the engine room, Garcia's unnaturally calm voice following them. You cannot escape evolution. It is already inside you all. Reed and Moore raced through the corridors, which were now almost completely covered with the organic circuitry. In places, the walls had become translucent, revealing human forms embedded within, the remains of the original crew, now part of the ship itself. We need to disable the engines, Reed gasped as they ran. If that thing creates a gateway to its dimension. The weapon systems, Moore said suddenly. Taylor mentioned the storm was carrying experimental weapons, if we can trigger them to overload. The labs would be on the lower decks, Reed said, but how do we get there? As if in answer, a section of flooring ahead of them suddenly melted away, revealing a drop to the deck below. Without hesitating, Moore jumped and Reed followed. They landed in a corridor that seemed less affected by the transformation. Heavy security doors lined the walls, each marked with warning symbols. Weapons research, Reed confirmed, reading the signs. Moore tried the nearest door. Locked, we need access codes. Reed thought quickly, then entered his historian's override sequence. To his surprise, the door slid open. Sometimes bureaucracy works in our favor, he said with a grim smile. My research clearance was updated when we got the mission. The laboratory beyond was filled with strange devices. At the center stood what appeared to be a cannon, but unlike any conventional weapon. Its barrel was aimed at a heavily reinforced chamber, and the control panel glowed with power. What is this? Moore asked. Reed examined the technical specifications on a nearby screen. It's a dark energy accelerator designed to create localized singularities, artificial black holes. Can we use it to destroy the ship? Better, Reed said, his eyes widening as he understood. We can use it to close whatever gateway they're trying to open. He began working at the controls, trying to reroute power to the weapon. Moore stood guard at the door, watching as the organic circuitry slowly crept down the corridor toward them. Whatever you're doing, do it faster, she urged. I'm trying, Reed replied. The system is fighting me. The ship shuddered again, more violently than before. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. Dimensional breach in progress, announced an automated voice. All personnel evacuate immediately. Reed frantically continued his work. I think I've got it, if I can overload the accelerator and aim it at the engine core. A figure appeared in the doorway, Garcia, his body now almost completely transformed. The human engineer was barely recognizable beneath the blue glowing circuitry that had replaced much of his skin. You do not understand what you're interrupting, he said, his voice eerily calm. This is salvation, not destruction. Moore fired her weapon repeatedly, forcing him back temporarily. Now Reed. Reed slammed his hand down on the activation sequence. The dark energy accelerator hummed to life, its barrel glowing with black-purple energy. Gateway formation at 60%, the ship's computer announced. Garcia stepped forward again, seemingly unaffected by Moore's weapon's fire. Join us willingly, he said. It will be less painful. The accelerator began to shake as energy built up beyond its safety parameters. Reed grabbed Moore's arm. We need to get to an escape pod now. They made a break for the door, ducking under Garcia's reaching arms. The transformed engineer turned to follow, but the accelerator behind him exploded in a flash of dark energy, enveloping him instantly. As Reed and Moore ran down the corridor, the ship around them began to tear itself apart. The organic circuitry pulsed frantically, as if in pain. Gateway destabilizing, the computer announced. Containment failure imminent. They reached an escape pod bay just as a massive tremor shook the ship. Reed punched the launch sequence, and they strapped in as the pod blasted away from the dying storm. Through the viewport, they watched as the massive warship was enveloped in swirling energies, half in normal space, half somewhere else. The storm seemed to fold in on itself, compressing into impossibility before exploding outward in a silent flash of light and darkness. And then it was gone, leaving nothing but empty space where the legendary lost warship had briefly returned. Inside the escape pod, Reed and Moore sat in exhausted silence, the adrenaline slowly fatting. Is it over? Moore finally asked. Reed was about to answer when he noticed something strange on his hand, a faint blue line tracing up his wrist, pulsing gently beneath the skin. I don't think so, he whispered. I don't think it's over at all. The escape pod drifted through space for 3 days before the rescue ship Valiant found them. Reed spent those days watching the blue line on his wrist slowly extend up his arm, trying to hide it from Moore. Sometimes he heard whispers, faint voices that seemed to speak directly into his mind. They told him secrets. They showed him visions. Reed, are you listening? Moore's voice pulled him back to reality. She sat across from him in the pod's cramped interior, studying his face. You've been staring at nothing for 10 minutes. Sorry, he said, pulling his sleeve down to cover the blue markings. Just tired. Moore nodded, though her eyes remained suspicious. The Valiant should be here in about 2 hours. We'll need to brief them on what happened. What exactly will we tell them? That an interdimensional entity took over the storm and tried to open a gateway to its realm. That the crew became part of the ship. We tell them the truth, Moore said firmly. With one addition, we recommend immediate quarantine for both of us. Reed's heart skipped a beat. You think we're infected? I think we can't be sure we're not, she replied. Those things were all over the ship. We both breathed the air, touched surfaces. She paused, studying him. Have you noticed anything unusual, any symptoms? Reed hesitated, the voices in his head suddenly growing louder, warning him to keep silent. No, he lied. Nothing unusual. Moore didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. We should rest while we can. Once the Valiant picks us up, it's going to be a long debriefing. Reed closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, but his mind was racing. The blue line had now reached his shoulder, spreading thin tendrils across his chest. He could feel it changing him, altering his thoughts. The strangest part was that it didn't feel threatening. It felt like an awakening. You are becoming more, the voices whispered. You will be our bridge. The Valiant was a military transport vessel, quickly repurposed for rescue once the Horizon reported losing contact with the boarding party. When Reed and Moore were brought aboard, the captain, a stern woman named Ramirez, insisted on immediate medical examination. Standard procedure, she told them as they were escorted to the medical bay, especially given the unusual circumstances. The ship's doctor, Mills, was clearly nervous as he scanned them. Reed tensed when the scanner passed over his arm, but the doctor said nothing about the blue lines. He cannot see, the voices explained. We exist between layers of reality. Only you can perceive our presence until the transformation is complete. Both of you seem healthy, Mills concluded, looking relieved. A bit dehydrated and stressed, but no injuries. Doctor, Moore said carefully, I'd like to request a quarantine anyway. Lieutenant Reed and I were exposed to unknown elements aboard the Storm. Mills looked confused. My scans show no contaminants or infectious agents. What exactly are you concerned about? Before Moore could answer, Captain Ramirez entered the medical bay. I've just received orders from Fleet Command. Your experience aboard the Storm has been classified at the highest level. You're both to be debriefed immediately. Reed noticed something odd in Ramirez's eyes, a faint blue glow that came and went so quickly he thought he might have imagined it. She is one of us now, the voices confirmed. When your escape pod sent its distress signal, we found her. A cold realization washed over Reed. Captain, he asked carefully, when did the Valiant receive orders to rescue us? 3 days ago, Ramirez answered smoothly, right after your pod launched. Reed and Moore exchanged glances. That was impossible. The Storm had been isolated from all communication, and their pod hadn't sent any messages until a day after they escaped. If you'll both follow me, Ramirez continued, seemingly unaware of their concern, we've prepared a secure room for debriefing. As they walked through the corridors of the Valiant, Reed noticed subtle changes in the ship's interior. Faint blue lines traced along the walls, visible only when he looked at them from the corner of his eye. And the crew they passed all moved with the same unnatural smoothness as Ramirez. Captain, Moore said suddenly, I'd like to contact Fleet Command directly before our debriefing. Protocol states that won't be necessary, Ramirez interrupted. All communications are being routed through proper channels. They reached a large door at the end of a corridor. Ramirez placed her hand on the scanner, and it slid open to reveal not a debriefing room but a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the ship's dimensions. The space stretched impossibly far, its walls covered with the same organic circuitry they had seen on the Storm. Suspended in the center was a pulsing mass of blue energy, like a heart beating at the center of a new organism. What is this? Moore demanded, reaching for her weapon only to find it missing. The gateway has already begun, Ramirez said, her voice now layered with others. The Storm was only the first attempt. This vessel will complete what was started. Reed felt the blue lines across his chest pulse in response to the energy in the room. The voices in his head grew louder, more insistent. Join us fully, accept the evolution. You destroyed the Storm, he realized aloud. You sacrificed it as a distraction while you took over the rescue ship. Ramirez smiled. The Storm served its purpose. It brought you to us, Reed, you with your lifetime of studying the vessel, your mind full of knowledge about Earth's defenses and history. Moore backed away slowly. Reed, whatever happens, we can't let them reach Earth. Reed nodded, fighting against the growing influence in his mind. He could feel his thoughts being rewritten, memories altered. The blue lines had spread across his entire chest now, reaching toward his other arm and up his neck. It's too late, Ramirez said, gesturing toward a viewport that appeared in the wall. Outside, Earth was visible, impossibly close. Somehow, while they had been talking, the Valiant had traveled to their home world. No, Moore whispered, we were light years away. Space bends to our will, Ramirez explained. Just as time and matter do, your concept of distance is limited. Reed fought against the voices, trying to think. If the entity could control the Valiant so completely, why did it need him? Why keep him and Moore alive at all? The answer came in a flash of clarity. The entity wasn't as powerful as it claimed. It needed human hosts to interface with human technology. It needed knowledge memories. You're afraid, Reed said suddenly. You're powerful, but you're few. You need us. Ramirez's expression flickered with something like surprise. Reed continued, gaining confidence. The Storm was your first attempt, but you couldn't control it completely. That's why you needed another ship, more hosts. Clever human, Ramirez acknowledged. But it changes nothing. The process has already begun. The blue energy in the center of the room pulsed more rapidly.